Okay, we are going to watch a video about really interesting one, this one, how FIFA corruption actually works. If you are a football fan, if you watch football, soccer, or you might say Americans, but yeah, football, if you watch, you know that it's not 100% perfect. There is a lot of corruption going on in FIFA, and a lot of corruption do go on, but yeah, we're gonna really see or deep dive into it to know that how it really works. It's all corrupted, bruh. It's not perfect word these days in any kind of stuff you can say, but yeah, this video is from Insider, and I think so this lady will tell us today and that how FIFA corruption goes down. Let's get it.
My name is Benita Merciadis. I was a senior executive with Football Federation Australia. I became a whistleblower when I witnessed how corruption and favours influenced the decision for the 2018 and 2022 World Cup tournaments. This is how crime works.
Okay.
The way the whole football world revolves is around money and spending, whether it be $50 million or $80 million on a bid for a World Cup is just ridiculous. I mean, you have to ask yourself, what is that money spent on?
50 million on what? Bid?
Whether it be $50 million or $80 million on a bid for a World Cup
is
just ridiculous. I mean, you have to ask yourself, what is that money spent on? You could have the best bid in the world, but the decision was never, ever going to be based on merit. It was based on the deals, the double deals,
money,
and the counter deals made behind closed doors.
Right. Oh, the bid. The way she was saying the bid, I was like, what the bid? The bid. Okay. Like who, where World Cup happens, what countries are included, all that.
I became involved directly with the World Cup bid in February 2008. Australia has one of the most competitive sporting environments in the world. The World Cup bid was seen as a way to turbocharge the game here. There was a time when we were discussing the budget request of $80 to $85 million internally. I raised the question, why do we need so much money merely to bid for a World Cup tournament? It wasn't the World Cup itself.
Bro, this World Cup, just put aside World Cup, this football teams make so much money. They are hella rich. Every year, these teams throw so much money at players, at stadiums, at random things just to make their team better. I mean, just take a look at Chelsea. I don't know, the Chelsea this year at least, they are the highest money making or money spent also. That's the team who spent the most money if you compare it to all the teams in the football, and where are they? They're still not the top team. I mean, it's also money doesn't mean your team will be the most best in the world or win the more games, but I just want to say, like, bro, these teams are hella rich. These people are hella rich. Real Madrid and all these teams, man, they are crazy spenders, man.
It was just a bid. I sat in that meeting with former colleagues of mine from government trying to justify this, and I couldn't. It was said to me at the time from a Treasury official, what you're doing here is money laundering. You're passing money from one entity to another in the FIFA World Cup bidding process. Really all that's required is a bid book, an inspection, and going to a few meetings. You don't need $80 million or $50 million for that. For instance, the US bid reportedly only had $10 million.
Okay.
There would be events held and we would invite all the executive committee members on behalf of Australia. This is the Australian bid. This is what we have to offer, and answering questions. That was the public part of what we did. It was all the other stuff that went around behind closed doors.
Right.
That was the issues around FIFA. At the end of the day, the government cut back the request from 80 to 85 million to approximately $48 million.
Okay.
I had been uncomfortable from day one with the fact that our consultants were secret, our budgeting was secret, all sorts of things were secret and that we weren't to talk about.
The tactics. Okay. Second favorite.
When we were bidding back in 2008 to 2010, there was no limit on how much money an individual bidding nation could spend on their bid.
Okay.
And there was no guidelines really, or no rules about what you could spend it on. There were guidelines about not colluding with other bidders, the guideline which said that we shouldn't offer executive committee members any favours, but they were very loosely adhered to. In a sense, FIFA set everybody up to collude because they had two World Cups going at the same time, 2018 and 2022.
What?
Almost any strategist in the world would think if we've got two tournaments up for grabs and we've got these two handfuls of bidders going for either, what you want to do is have a partner going into that voting room from an opposite bidding team so you can exchange votes. So to have that guideline was just utter nonsense, and to suggest that it didn't go on in every single bid is also extraordinarily naive. It did. At the time, there were 24 members of the executive committee, and so to win, you needed 13 votes. It was simple as that.
Okay.
One of the ways that we thought we could win is to be everyone's second favourite bidder. And one by one, everyone else would fall away and we'd come through and win. Bearing in mind that within Asia, there had been, at the time that the bidding started, there were 5 bidders. There was Australia, there was Indonesia, there was Qatar, Japan and Korea. We knew who was on the executive committee, but we needed to find out what sort of people they were, to the extent that you could from a desktop research, who they were married to, how many children they had, what languages they spoke, what their ethnicity is, what their religion is, whether they drank wine, what sort of wine, what were their business interests, where did their business interests lead us. We did put it all together as part of a dossier on all of these people. And other countries also tried to do the same thing. That was just going on all the time.
The consultants. Never to tell.
Consultants are used frequently within the football world, but particularly while bidding is on, because they give plausible deniability to bidders. So if someone asks a question and says, did you have a conversation with a particular executive committee member, you can get up and say, hand on heart, no, didn't have that conversation, because they had others do it for them. The first time I was concerned about our World Cup bid and about how the decision was going to be made was when I learned that we had employed a particular international consultant to help us with our bid. And a colleague went to his bookshelf and pulled out Andrew Jennings' book Foul, a book that was well known throughout the world as having exposed what FIFA was like, and opened it to a chapter on this particular person. And he said, you better read this because you're going to have to get used to him. Whoa. Almost every bidding nation had consultants. When the then chairman of Football Federation Australia, Frank Lowy, decided that we would bid, he went to Sepp Blatter, who was the president of FIFA at the time. He went to the Germans and said, well, how did you win? And they said, well, we had these consultants. And you can't win without these consultants. So they were seen as being the 3 key people who could help deliver a World Cup. 2 of those people we were never to mention. We were never to tell anybody that we had engaged Fedor Radmon or Peter Hargitay. The key members of the bid team included Frank Lowy, who is also a billionaire property developer in Australia, our 3 international consultants, and the Chief Executive Officer, Ben Buckley. Within the staff, the 3 key people were Ben Buckley, myself, who was Head of Corporate and Public Affairs, and a colleague, Stuart, who was Head of Operations. One of the things that was clear that going into bidding, Frank Lowy certainly knew what FIFA was like himself. He knew that the people within FIFA were very impressed by wealth, and he was prepared to show his wealth in order to impress people. There was a number of
that's what most of them do, right?
Hung around or were part of the decision-making process. So, for instance, the Korean Football Association president was a billionaire. He also had been a candidate for the Korean presidency of the country, not just of the Football Association. There was quite a lot of people with means, people who could impress other members of the executive committee or other football association members, even if they didn't have a vote.
Money talks, The favors gold plated.
In terms of favours for executive committee members, that was always going to happen. One of the most striking examples from an Australian perspective was when in September 2010, when we learned that Australia had given $500,000 US to upgrade a stadium in Trinidad and Tobago. With respect to the Caribbean, they're not high priority in terms of Australian foreign aid. And you'd have to ask yourself, why did we give US $500,000 to upgrade a stadium in Trinidad and Tobago? Well, the answer's quite simple. One of the most important players in FIFA at that time came from Trinidad and Tobago, and that's Jack Warner. Jack Warner was the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Football Association and the president of CONCACAF, which is the North American, Caribbean and Central American Confederation. He had been running that for more than 20 years, and he was an extraordinarily powerful person in world football. From very early on, when we met with Peter Hargitay, it was about what Jack said, what Jack wanted. Jack would like this, Jack would like that. And look, Jack Warner must have seen an Australian and thought it was Christmas every time.
Yeah.
Because whatever Jack Warner asked for, Jack Warner got.
Yeah.
Many years afterwards, it was found out that the money bounced around the world from Sydney to London to New York to Port of Spain in Trinidad and Tobago, and it never ended up with the Trinidad and Tobago Football Association. It ended up in Jack Warner's personal bank account. At the time that we're talking about, I think the more common ways in which corruption happened was in relation to individual executive committee members asking for things. Sometimes that would be financial, sometimes it wouldn't be. It would be something else entirely. For instance, matches organised, international matches between countries. When two countries play an international match, there are TV rights given, there are the expenses met for the team. And that was an easy way for money to exchange hands in football's terms legitimately. There's a lot of money to be made from getting an allocation of tickets, as people who are on the executive committee at the time would get, and then on-selling them. And not on-selling them at face value, but at extraordinary
expensive
rates. The sons of Jack Warner, for example, have been reportedly arrested in the United States and remain in the United States virtually under house arrest
1.17 million.
Those issues. Another one, of course, is the giving of gifts. The gifts would get more expensive and more expensive as time went by, and you almost trying to outdo each other with how valuable the gifts were. But you wouldn't go anywhere without them because you wouldn't be welcome without them. At the time of the FIFA Congress, Frank Lowy hosted a dinner at his personal residence for the executive committee members and their partners. And at the dinner table were gold-plated plates, dinner plates, with the names of the guests engraved into the plates. And also at the dinner table were gifts for each of the members, executive committee members and their partners. So men got pearl cufflinks from one of Australia's preeminent pearl jewellers, and for the women there was pearl necklaces. At the time, Jack Warner's wife wasn't there, and she missed out on her pearl necklace. One of the first things we were asked was to get Maureen Warner a pearl necklace to replace it. Even on sale, this necklace was $1,200 Australian, $1,400 Australian dollars on sale.
Damn, the Oceania. Impossible task.
Well, Oceania only had one vote, but its vote was absolutely vital, because up until 1 January 2006, Australia had been part of Oceania. We needed to be able to say we had Oceania's vote. So Reinald Tamari, who was then the president of the Oceania Football Confederation, he visited Australia early on, and we also visited Oceania to make sure that we were aware of what it was that Oceania wanted to give us our vote. Well, I always remember Reinald Tamari and his chief executive at the time of Oceania Football Confederation, Ty Nicholas, came to Australia and they had a list of demands of things that they wanted. And there was a list of about 6 or 7 items. Key one of which struck out to me immediately, was they wanted $4 million.
Whoa.
And one, I thought that was an impossible task, and 2, I felt extraordinarily uncomfortable.
Right.
But what we would give money for was what they called sports development means. It was decided that the $4 million would be...
So just give $4 million, but in the papers just write it's for some development or some stadium or something like that. So it doesn't really look like you really gave them 4 million, like literally gave them for nothing. So just write in the paper that is for something or for some development, construction, blah, blah, blah. And you got the 4 million.
We split up between the countries of Oceania other than New Zealand, and that was how we would give our $4 million. And those sports development projects didn't have to even be for football. It could be for netball, it could be for rugby league.
Oh.
It could be for whatever was the biggest sport in that particular country. But it has to be said that to this date, 15 years later, that project now continues. So
Really?
There wasn't inherently anything wrong with the activity. You can't, as an Australian living next door to the Pacific, say that we shouldn't be giving foreign aid to Pacific nations. There was nothing wrong with that. However, this was the first time it was done, and it was only done because we needed Oceania's vote.
Qatar played a huge part in FIFA, dude.
The other bidder that came out of the blue in February 2000...
Bro, Qatar got a lot of money, man. I mean, those guys are rich, dude. I'm sure all richest than all these guys you have talked before, But yeah, it's gonna really turn around the whole FIFA thing.
Unexpectedly in 2009 was Qatar. And I always remember we were sitting in a meeting room in our offices in Sydney, and Peter Hargitay was there, the secret Peter Hargitay. And he said, Qatar won't win, it's too hot. And Mohammed doesn't even want it. And that was true. At the time, Mohammed bin Haman, who was then president of the Asian Football Confederation, said quite clearly that he...
I think we do have a chance if we have one candidate, and I would be happy with one bid from Australia.
...supported Australia's bid. There's a couple of big disadvantages for Qatar is mostly no one took them seriously. They were seen as this tiny little dot of a nation in the middle of the Middle East that had temperatures 40 degrees plus in June or July. What no one had noticed is...
I mean, at the end, last World Cup was in Qatar, so, they got their thing.
In the bidding agreements that everybody signed was that FIFA had the capacity to change the dates of the World Cup. It didn't have to be held in June, July. Qatar would be much too hot in June, July to host a World Cup, but it would be perfectly pleasant in November, December. So they gave themselves the wriggle room legally to change those dates. The other disadvantage they had...
So normal date is June or July for World Cup, and they were like, okay, Qatar is too hot in those months. Let's change up the date and move it forward or backward, whichever months is little bit colder, you can say.
And bearing in mind, this is 2008, 2009. At the time, Qatar didn't have enough hotel rooms. So you needed something like 32 hotels to accommodate the World Cup.
Right.
And they didn't have that many at the time. And I always remember Hassan al-Thawadi, who was the leader of the Qatar bid, and he said, can we, being Qatar, use hotels in Dubai? Which is only an hour away, to be fair.
But still, it's like 1 hour flight though, right?
So the only answer that FIFA could give to that was yes, it was perfectly okay to do so. So one by one, the things that had been against Qatar were nullified. And they had one overwhelming issue in their favour, and that is, or one person, Mohammed bin Haman.
Right.
A pivotal point in the whole World Cup bidding was when the Emir of the time is thought to have called bin Haman into his palace or wherever and said, I want you to support the Qatar World bid. You've got to stop this. It's not about you and the FIFA presidential election. It's about Qatar winning the World Cup. And at that time, bin Haman, with all his heart and soul, swung his effort into Qatar winning the World Cup bid, and subsequently they did. This first came to
money
light
again
in June 2010 at the time of the FIFA Congress in Johannesburg, and the Asian Football Confederation made a decision without consulting with Australia first that it was going to support a European country for 2018. But all of a sudden, now here's Mohammed bin Haman saying, no, we're going to support a European country for 2018 and 2022 will be between Asia and the US. It caught the Australian bid team by a huge surprise. They tried to make out, oh, yes, we thought this would happen and it didn't matter, we were only going to go for 2022. Yet they had to do a 180-degree turn on their public positioning because up until then, the public positioning had been around both tournaments.
Negotiation. Right of refusal.
I always remember being in Zurich in July 2009 and we were walking across the foyer of the FIFA headquarters. There'd been a couple of days of meetings. Our Prime Minister had been to meet Sepp Blatter and Jerome Valcke, who was then the General Secretary or CEO of FIFA, turned to us and said, you know you won't win. And we had been walking almost like West Wing TV, you know? And we'd been walking, we stopped and said, what do you mean? You won't win because you can't possibly get the revenue from TV that the Americans will. Now, this was July 2009.
Okay.
We were about 6-7 months into the bidding process and had another 18 months to go. My view at the time was we should withdraw. The time frame was wrong.
Because Europe versus US now, I guess.
And we just didn't have the powerful networks that the United States and elsewhere in the world has. And I thought at the time, okay, we withdraw with honour and we say to the government, here's the money back that we haven't spent.
Okay.
But instead, what was decided is that we would get PwC to write a report, a so-called independent report, which said the future of football is in Asia, which of course we'd all heard before. All the future TV revenues were going to come from Asia. 75% of the world's population was in Asia and we were in the Asian time zone. Therefore, we were going to have the biggest TV revenues. So we tried to argue the case against American TV networks. Fast forward to around about October 2010.
Okay.
And what do you know? What was then Al Jazeera signed an agreement with FIFA for $100 million for what is referred to in the agreement as a production contribution.
Okay.
If Qatar won the World Cup bid. This was a first, that there would be a production contribution if Qatar was successful.
Okay.
In addition to that, it was widely talked about that Emirates Airlines was getting a little bit weary of its sponsorship of FIFA, didn't like a lot of the scandal around FIFA, was not going to renew its contract with FIFA. And lo and behold, when that contract came up for renewal, and typically an existing sponsor has first right of refusal, Emirates said, no, we don't want to be involved. And who should be ready to come in without hardly any need for negotiation but Qatar Airways. So, you know, this is where countries such as Russia and Qatar, where there's little separation between the nation state and the private business interests, have a far easier way of winning tournaments like this compared with, say, an Australia or an England or a Holland or Belgium. There were a few occasions in which it was discussed that we would try to convince Qatar, the country, at a government-to-government level, not to take part in the bidding or to withdraw. What did the Australian government have that they could potentially offer Qatar? Landing rights for Qatar Airways. Qatar Airways was then a very new airline. They were looking to expand into different markets. And at the time, it was very difficult to get landing rights in Australia. So that was seen as something they could offer. Well, another one was a few months beyond that, when we asked our consultant to visit the Emir of Qatar and convince him to withdraw. In return for which, Australia would support Doha's bid for the Olympic Games. There was talk at the time that Doha wanted to host the Olympic Games. And bear in mind, in the Olympic movement, Australia is one of the most powerful countries. The vice president of the Olympic movement to this day is John Coates, who is an Australian. He is very close to Frank Lowy. So we felt confident that we could make that offer and help make it happen.
The Russian board. Of course, that's really important.
I think it was about March 2009. There was an announcement about who was bidding for 2018 and 2022. There was an assumption around a lot of the
David
football world
or
at the time
Ronnie?
that England was a shoo-in to host the 2018 World Cup. I thought dismissing Russia was probably a little bit premature.
Okay.
For a couple of reasons. One, Russia was run at the time, it was President Medvedev and Prime Minister Putin. It was one of their swaps of positions, but we all knew who was running the country. In July 2009, Sepp Blatter got up and talked about how he wanted the World Cup to be in places that had demonstrably been able to host mega sporting events, which we saw as something in our favour because we do that, but also which would make an impact on the world. And it was clear to me then that Russia was probably going to be his favourite and who he wanted to see win the 2018 World Cup.
Okay.
Bearing in mind, this was at a time before we knew
Russia's
about the
ban.
state-sanctioned doping within Russia in relation to Sochi. The discussion
Oh.
became around, well, who can we strike a partnership with? And everybody assumed that Australia would do that with England. But our consultants very strongly said, forget England, we'll go to Russia.
Oh.
That's who we do the deal with.
Oh.
I do remember very clearly a conversation that I had with Frank Lowy, and I was feeling very uncomfortable and tapping my pen and thinking I really don't want to be here. And he and I got on very well at that time, and he said to me, "What's wrong? What are you upset about?" And I said, "I'm thinking of something that somebody in my past would say to me as I was growing up." And I mimicked the accent of the person who said it to me, and I said, "Never trust a Russian."
Oh.
And he said, "That person is probably right, but this is what I've got to do now, and I will do whatever it takes to win." And, you fast forward then many months later to when the vote happened, and we didn't win and Russia did win.
Okay.
And there's two of our consultants sitting back having a cigar and a glass of scotch with the Russian, or probably vodka actually, but a glass with
Russia,
the Russians,
because,
celebrating the Russian win.
So all were just, with them, with Russia.
Towards the end of the bidding timeline, around about October, November 2010, Raynal Tamari ended up being suspended from the executive committee.
This is the
Because
downfall.
he had asked for one too many favours.
Money, 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 money.
Masquerading as consultants for the American bid visited him in New
Buy
Zealand
votes.
and said, "What can we do to get your vote for the American bid?" And he said, "You can give us $4 million." So
Oh.
even though he'd already got $4 million from us, he wanted another $4 million.
See?
Turns out
Greedy
they were fake
MFs.
consultants, they were journalists. Tamari had two choices. He either could fight the fact that this all happened and he was suspended, or he could accept it. If he had accepted it, then there would have been another voter come in and vote for him, for Oceania, but he decided to fight it.
Oh.
Meanwhile, Mohammed bin Haman privately was funding Tamari's court case, because by then bin Haman was totally committed to Qatar winning that World Cup bid.
Okay.
Therefore, Oceania didn't have a vote. So there was Australia stuck without one of its votes that it was counting on as it went into the room for the final vote.
The score. Completely disgraced.
The outcome of the vote was announced in Zurich, of course, so in Australia it was very early hours of the morning, and I was watching it. I didn't expect that we would win. It was no surprise in one sense that we didn't win, but of course it was disappointing. I felt very sorry for my colleagues. Most of my colleagues who worked on the bid wouldn't know any of this stuff. They were junior people, junior officers. They would have just worked really hard to do the best job they could do to put the best foot forward. Well, Australia tried very hard to get everybody's vote, but in the end, they got one.
Oh.
And that wasn't Raynal Tamari because he wasn't in the room to vote.
Eliminated, huh?
It was reported afterwards that at
Wow,
least
it got
two
the least
people
vote.
told Frank Lowy that they had voted for Australia.
Qatar was killing
But
it.
of course, that wasn't possible. There was only one vote. My personal view is that vote was Sepp Blatter because he knew what was happening And you felt
Everybody
sorry
knew
for
what
us.
was going to
And
happen,
so
dude.
he had a bit of a soft spot for Australia and didn't want to see us completely disgraced.
Okay. The backstory. Almost a dream.
I've always been engaged with football my entire life. My
Okay.
parents were displaced persons in Australia after the Second World War. And one of the ways that displaced persons and later on migrants in Australia sort of settled in a new country was to set up a soccer club or a football club.
Okay.
I joined Football Federation Australia in 2007, having
Oh.
previously worked in the not-for-profit sector and the government sector, and I was appointed to the role of Head of Corporate and Public Affairs. About 5 or 6 years before that, I had also worked as a team manager for the Socceroos, the Australian national men's football team.
Okay.
So I had grown up with the game, and it was just part of who I was. And when the opportunity came to work in it, I thought it was almost a dream job.
Right. Yeah. The culture. Male dominated. Yeah.
I think
True.
my experience as a woman working in a male-dominated organisation is the same as any woman around the world working in a male-dominated organisation. It's not easy.
I don't know.
You're expected probably to do more than the average man. That's
Okay.
just the truth. If you're also a wife and a mother, or just a mother, and you have other responsibilities, it can be very difficult to
True.
balance those.
True.
And within football in particular, not from the players. I've dealt with players, but with the administration, there was a lot of misogyny. The view that women weren't really fit to work in football and they shouldn't be there. And you weren't really welcomed as a professional or as an equal. On the way back from Egypt, where we had been for the 2009 Under-20 World Cup, saw online a newspaper report which had Peter Hargitay on the front page that revealed that Peter Hargitay was employed by us. We then had our minister's office on the phone saying, is this report true? Because they were then, of course, concerned how are they going to answer a question in Parliament about the Australian bid team employing a consultant that we hadn't actually told anyone about. A good question. Ben said, I'm going to ring Peter Hargitay. And Peter Hargitay was on the end of the phone screaming and blaming me for the report because this journalist was a friend of mine. He's someone I had known for 15, 20 years beforehand. And I had not told the journalist that Peter Hargitay was employed by us, and I wasn't his source. But Peter Hargitay really screamed at me and blamed me and told me I was stupid and incompetent and disloyal and all sorts of things.
Okay.
The sort of thing you don't really say to anyone, and the sort of thing, it was a misogynistic behaviour. I look back now and realise how appallingly I was treated as a woman, and all the men I worked with, not one of them stood up for me in that respect.
Wow.
And that was bad enough. So I did read a report about 100 female players
Oh,
who
wow.
had written protesting about the sponsorship by Aramco.
Oh.
I think it's great to see younger generations of players who are willing to say what
Stand
they
up,
believe.
right.
And we should be encouraging it. We
That's
should be encouraging it in the
for
world.
sure. Breaking cover. The fifth state.
I became a whistleblower by evolution, really. I can't say that I sat there and thought, I'm going to be a whistleblower now. In January 2010, I was called in to the President's building that he had in Sydney and basically was told by the CEO that I was sacked. And when I asked why, I knew why. They didn't like me being around. They didn't like me asking questions. They didn't like the fact that I didn't like being there. He just, referred to an email I had sent which said that I was uncomfortable with one of our consultants. So that was it. I was out of a job. When I was
they fired her.
sacked, people contacted me and said, what happened? Because people who knew me knew that I wasn't incompetent.
Right.
They knew that I wouldn't leave willingly, that I loved football and I loved the work.
Okay.
So what happened? And as I started to put things together, I realised that the whole process was set up to be corrupt. The whole process was set up for all the things that were in the guidelines that they said you
Whoa.
shouldn't do. I think it's up to people such as journalists in particular, who are the fourth estate, and whistleblowers like myself, who are the fifth estate,
Damn.
to bring these issues to the attention of, if not the ordinary football fan, at least to people who care about governance and how decisions are made. At the end of the day, that's football's money, and that should be accounted for as money that belongs to the game. There were all sorts
Damn, that's messed up.
investigations into that time frame and that era. The FBI, 4 years later, raided a FIFA meeting in Zurich in May 2015, and that led to a range of arrests and a range of suspensions. Sepp Blatter was suspended in 2015.
8 years.
Then in 2016 there was an election for a new president.
Okay. Who's the president now?
And Jack Warner were suspended from FIFA because it had been reported that Jack Warner had caused 25 payments of $40,000 each to be made to 25 members of the Caribbean Football Association.
Money again, man.
Association
These guys are hungry.
And that was in the context of Mohammed bin Hamdan wanting to be president of FIFA and the FIFA presidential election coming up in June that year.
Okay.
Back then, in 2010, for deciding the 2018 and 2022 World Cups, the president and the executive committee made the decision. It was a vote by 24 men as to who would get the World Cup. Today, first of all, they publish the bidding documents, which is an advance on what we used to have. They used to be secret. They also have a vote of the entire Congress. That is not to say that the FIFA president doesn't try to influence how that vote will go, but it is an open vote of the Congress. But in many ways, not just in relation to World Cup bidding, but other things which FIFA does, they're not a lot more transparent. They've developed policies. They've got great PR. They spend an awful lot on legal costs. But there's not a whole lot more transparency, and you still have a president who's extraordinarily powerful, just like Sepp Blatter was, and who is very keen to get his own way on a number of things, such as who are going to be the next World Cup host. They're almost, despite the vote, which is there for show, it's almost a one-man decision as to how that's going to happen. And we see that now.
That's
Gianni
weird.
Infantino, who is the current FIFA president, more or less saying Saudi Arabia is going to get the 2034 World Cup without any competition.
What the hell?
And they did. I think the issue around the Saudi World Cup is employment and the use of money, labour laws, all that sort of thing that is still relevant in Saudi Arabia. The decision was not a sort of democratic one. I mean, it was for show, but it wasn't really. And I think it just shows that in FIFA today, money continues to talk.
That's the money's the first thing in the FIFA, dude.
Of FIFA and World Cups. You would find that change over decades as the powers within world sport have pivoted. Once upon a time, the power was very much with the Americans. It then brought in the Chinese and the Russians and now the Middle East. And that's where world sport is heading.
Okay. The aftermath doesn't leave you.
There may always be someone out there listening to this or watching this and want retaliation of some sort. And you do have to be prepared for it. You also have to be emotionally prepared for it. It's very difficult to be a whistleblower, and it doesn't leave you. Once you're it's almost like having played football for your national team. You're not a former footballer, you're a footballer. And you're not a former whistleblower, you're a whistleblower. And so the impact on your life is there forever.
Damn.
I don't think I could have come forward any sooner than I did. One of the things about being an employee is you have to do your job. And so I did it what I thought was the right thing, and I raised questions, I raised concerns. I did that internally, thinking that was the right way to go. I have been sent threats in the past. I have been surveilled.
I am sure, man. I am sure.
Fake websites, fake emails, fake social media accounts set up in my name. And so when I was no longer there, I was freed to be able to talk about these things. When I was sacked, and then when it was known that I was a whistleblower, I was told I would never work in Australia again. In terms of finding employment with an employer, that's absolutely correct. It was almost impossible to find a job. So I went about and created my own. So I have my own business. I have a publishing business called Fair Play Publishing. We specialise in publishing books about football, mostly non-fiction books, but also fiction. And to date, we have published 75 books, and we're still going strong. I'm very proud of that.
Okay, man. I hope she does good.
I see it as telling Australian football stories and about its culture and about its people that will stand the test of time, because those books will be there in 100 years' time. And I certainly don't regret being a whistleblower. It's certainly been tough times for my family and myself.
True.
And life does change, but I'm often asked, would you do it again? And the answer to that is yes, I would. And the reason I would do that again is nothing to do with me. It's to do with my love for football and the way I think that it should be run, and our important international institutions should be run. There should be accountability, there should be transparency, and there should be greater democracy in terms of people who are able to participate in it.
Frank Lowy did not respond to request for comment. Okay. Which I was sure they won't. Denied allegations of wrongdoing. Okay. Knew it. Wrote in an email, the allegation that Bonita me are not truthful account of the dealing between myself and her. Bonita has displayed considerable since she left. Okay. Which continue with this latest allegation. A spokesperson for I spoke to my client, however, he has no recollection of these issues anymore. But of course, all of them would deny. Why would any of them would say, yeah, I did it, I do not recall any conversation. Yeah, sure. I mean, if you watch football, if you know about football and soccer, I started to get into football like a year ago, you can say. I was not into at all, never watched any World Cup other than 2022 World Cup. And after that, I started to get more interested in football, and till now I watch it very interestingly. But that's why I really wanted to watch this video, like how FIFA corruption really works. I kind of knew it's corrupted, and I kind of knew all this bid system is all about money, and how all these countries, and they don't even care about the votes and all. If you got money, if you got power, and you get the chance to host a World Cup in your country, which brings more people and you make more money. It's all about money at the end of the day, So W's to this woman, man. W's to this woman for really being a whistleblower, which means just being open about what they are doing wrong, and telling other people that this is going wrong and they need to change this. But because of that, she got fired, and which she have to go through so many things until her life, whole life. So her name is Bonita Mercedes, and former head of corporate and public affairs at Football Australia. She's Australian, but overall W's to her for doing and speaking up and standing up for what is right and what should have been done, But I'm sure for a very long time we won't get FIFA to be very, very transparent with us or their viewers, or how all this thing works, or how voting works, how World Cup are held, or in any country, you can say. And it's so weird that how these president of FIFA can randomly say, oh, this year this country will hold FIFA World Cup without any kind of votes, and which literally means they gave them money and they were like, okay, we want to hold a World Cup in our country, money is here, say and announce our name. they do, boom, finish. No other country can replace that. If you want to replace it, give us more money than them, but yeah, that's how it works, man. But yeah, if you are as the first comment under this video is like, if you are average football fan, then you know that FIFA is corrupt. But yeah, obviously this video was really eye-opening, that how whole process work from start till the finish. And even till now they got little bit transparent, little bit telling us, or a viewer, as a fan, you can see what is going on, who's voting for him, how the whole voting parliament is going on in live when it happens. But still there are so many hidden things which we never get to see, because as you can see from this video that this is only one person. I'm sure there are many other whistleblowers as well from FIFA, and I'm sure everyone have their own stories, everyone have their own side, like, oh, they did this to me, they were not doing this right. She's just from Australia. I'm sure there are many other from other countries too which never spoke up. But really good video, really eye-opening video, I think so, man. First time watching from Insider, but I know their channel, how it all works. I have watched few videos from them before myself. But yeah, really good eye-opening video about FIFA corruption, and it is all about money at the end, man. Yeah, money talks at the end. But yeah, let's see who get the next World Cup and the next World Cup and the next World Cup, because 2034 World Cup is already done. Saudi Arabia is having it. But yeah, that's it for this one, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.